ASLE conference attendees. My name is Moe Gámez. My pronouns are they, them. The title of my presentation is, quote, "To be the pig of dreams, the pig any of us could be," end quote, Ludic affect and radical kinship in Denise Levertov's Pig Dreams. All of the images included in this presentation are illustrations found in Pig Dreams, courtesy of illustrator Lieb Coolidge. The first image on the slide depicts a human person crouched down, petting a pig as a cat sits to the side. Flowers frame them all around. The image on this next slide depicts an outdoor scene. A standing human person framed by trees pets a pig. A cow looks to the viewer behind the other two beings. Snow hills frame them all around. Kin-making practices require constant rearticulation, but it is a work that remains imperative to formulating a harmonious planetary future. Our kin anthropologists and theorists lead the way, figuring the significance of making kin with more than human critters as integral to radical imaginaries, as co-indicated with the need for anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and anti-colonial resistance. As entities within the Cthulhu scene, the project of Donna Haraway's Sympoiesis figures prominently within Denise Levertov's Pig Dreams, a collection of poetry published in 1981 that, while at first glance might appear to be an animal-friendly illustrated children's poetry book, actually establishes a precedent for radical kinship with more than human beings suitable for all audiences. Haraway's, quote, Sympoiesis, defined as making with, reorients the reader's understanding of Levertov's poems as made with Sylvia, our central pigkin. By means of a more radicalized form of kinship, Levertov indirectly undermines the notion of more than human beings as, quote, pets, and perceives Sylvia's being by acting out her life. Levertov relies on her utilization of inscape and in-stress, or rather all sensory phenomena from their shared environment to illustrate their unique bond. The vitality affects or perception of the ludic take precedence, and the existence of kinship hierarchies fall into a sort of decorative role that do not manifest in the poem's documentation of their intercommunication. Sylvia may be a pet in normative interpretation, but she clearly embodies so much more than that interpretation allows. This relationship based on kin with more than human beings remains a timeless imperative, one that I assert is necessary for humans to emerge in a more just planetary collaboration. The transference of joy from she-human to only pig to cat-pig to dog brothers to he-humans matters most. Each being teaches one another new ways of activating joy, and they co-facilitate an ethics of care amongst themselves. What stays in the foreground in almost all of the poems are moments of joy in being together, and joy in experiencing the world together. The ability to hold climate anxiety in tension with joy and ludic creatures remain integral to present and future worlds. The image on this next slide depicts the cover of Levertov's book, The Life Around Us, on which there is an illustrated image of a well-loved trail shrouded by trees. As Pig Dreams predates the 1997 publication of The Life Around Us, Levertov's self-selected collection of nature poetry, it may be important to consider how Pig Dreams effectively contributed to her compassion for the greater natural world. With regard to Levertov's careful selection in The Life Around Us, it is notable that, quote, rather than putting them in chronological order, she chose a thematic arrangement that reflects a poetic dual impulse to praise the natural world and to lament its destruction, end quote. The dual impulse that Hart describes seems indicative of a type of tension held similarly in Pig Dreams. The poet celebrates Sylvia, the protagonist's pigkin, in the same poetic narrative that she denigrates human consumption of the world. Levertov's choice of protagonist has a particularly special implication. Sylvia belonged within Lieb Coolidge's family, whom was the pastel artist of the book, and Levertov found herself inspired by their relationship. Critic Jose Manuel Rodriguez Herrera's recently published article, quote, "A Chosen Poet Among Humans," Denise Levertov's Pig Dreams, read as a matrifocal allegory, end quote, interprets Levertov's collection of poems as an allegory for her own experience as the, quote, token woman poet in the bee community. While this interpretation proves useful in analyzing Levertov's poetic experience, it misses a great opportunity to read into the way Levertov's embodiment of Sylvia through her poetics represents Levertov thinking, writing Sylvia. In a sense, Levertov becomes Sylvia, not the other way around. The image on this next slide depicts a large hilly landscape with the head of a pig in the immediate foreground, as well as a small terrier-type dog resting on a path in the background. In order to better understand the dynamic relationship between Sylvia, the protagonist, and Levertov, the poet, it seems imperative to at least address or consider the presence of what initially appears to be a standard case of literary anthropomorphism. Brian Masumi's What Animals Teach Us About Politics provides an insightful metric with which to read Pig Dreams, stating, quote, "The human's renewing of ties with its instinctive animal core is a counter-participation in intensest nature, carried to the highest degree of lived abstraction, suspended in the artifice of writing. In this mode of lived abstraction, the human is not conscious of the animal, the writing is not discoursing about the animal, the human is doing the animal in thinking, writing, gesture. Enacting a pure animal expression in a mutual envelope not of one and the other, and the neither one nor the other of their zone of indiscernibility in becoming." End quote. Utilizing Masumi's theory, Levertov is not simply writing of or about Sylvia, but rather engages in a counter-participation. She does Sylvia, in the sense of becoming the more-than-human pig. Levertov's exploration of Sylvia produces a sympoiesis in thinking, writing, gesture. As fictitious representations of perhaps real daily encounters between the two beings, detractors may not see the value in this perspective. Yet Levertov's fervently political and social commitments, noted in her prose collection The Poet and the World, seem carefully woven into the poems in Pig Dreams. Speaking of her political commitments, she states, "It would be strange indeed to exclude them, quote, since she believes in the essential interrelatedness and mutual reinforcement of the meditative and the active," end quote. Rather, it seems that Levertov's anthropomorphization through word choice might lend affordances to the relationship that aren't lexically available in the confines of the normative species hierarchical system. By virtue of existing, and joyfully at that, Sylvia co-creates the artistic vision within the pages of Levertov's collection of poems. The image on this next slide depicts a large pig in the foreground sitting in a patch of lettuce or cabbage. Any green thumbs listening, please advise if I'm horribly wrong. A group of trees and a house sit in the background. The opening poem, quote, "Her destiny," seems a testament to the stickiness of the relationship between Sylvia and her home. Sylvia proclaims herself pet in such a distinct and prideful way that it becomes difficult to deny her the title. The poem begins with an idyllic description of the beginnings of pig life, that of Sylvia herself, quote, "piglet among piglets," framing her within the warm, womb-like comforts of the pigsty. Levertov does not invoke people, places, or norms within this opening stanza. Rather, the reader has been invited into the home of a bleary-eyed piglet as yet unidentified. The following stanza proves to be, in stark contrast, laden with human-made signifiers. "But I am Sylvia, chosen, I was established pet, to be the pig of dreams, the pig any of us could be, taken out of the sty, away from the ravaged soil of pig yards, freed from boredom and ugliness, I was chosen to live without dread of slaughter." The first line of the stanza names the collection's protagonist, and some being has chosen Sylvia as she was established pet, which signals to the reader that Sylvia's chosen demarcation had little to do with her will and desire, and more to do with her predetermined place in the world. The passive voice of "was established" in the stanza leaves the hypothetical establisher unknown to the reader, leaving her petdom a spectral predetermined essence. The original italicization of pet in this poem only once again returns when Sylvia eats for the first time, indicating that the italicization is meant to signal a feature of life Sylvia does not yet comprehend. The image on this next slide depicts a pig out in the snow, trees surrounding them, with a beautiful pink sky and snow-capped mountains far in the background. Levertov speaks of her organic form and embodied poetic style when she states, quote, "I believe every space and comma is a living part of the poem and has its function, just as every muscle and pore of the body has its function, and the way the lines are broken is a functioning part essential to the poem's life," end quote. Utilizing this framework to illuminate the reading of Levertov's thinking, writing gesture of Sylvia, the poetic vehicle for Levertov seems laden with meaning representative of the embodied experience of perceiving and playing with her pig kin. It would be rude to deny the possibility of joyful life. Perhaps Levertov has anthropomorphized Sylvia to a certain degree, but is it anthropomorphization to write Sylvia as capable of creative thought, co-facilitating joy, or meditation? In accordance with the writing of Brian Masumi, it would be far more rudely presumptive to deny these as possibilities in Sylvia's cognition and perception of the world. To purport that pigs operate by automatic functions regardless of the outside effective world seems a purposefully under-observant assumption. But in the grand scheme of empires and consumption, baseless assumptions always seem to conveniently work to the benefit of humankind in the short term. A real ethics of more than human care requires less baseless assumptions, negating possibilities of life, and more time in the observed immanent in-between. Describing sympathy as the, quote, trans-individual becoming brought into being by intuitions acting out, Masumi goes on to say that, quote, the act of intuition dramatically mutually includes at least two non-coinciding perspectives. It plays the in-between. In the immediacy of its inaction, it is already trans-individual in the sense of inhabiting the gaps between individual perspectives. The image on this next slide depicts a dog sleeping on a woven mat, a hilly landscape behind them. Levertov's poems actively inhabit the gaps between her own perspective and that of Sylvia, creating this sympathetic sympoiesis. In an effort to define organic poetic form, Levertov explains that, quote, a partial definition, then, of organic poetry might be that it is a method of apperception, i.e. of recognizing what we perceive, and of which man's creative works are analogies, resemblances, natural allegories. Such poetry is exploratory, end quote. The resemblances stated in the quote highlight the quality of the trans-individual felt in Pig Dreams. The constituent parts or quality of that resembling remain fuzzy and impossible to compartmentalize. Levertov's poetic mission in organic poetry seems to be of recognizing what we perceive. The image on this next slide depicts the full form of a pig in a hilly landscape. Encounters between Sylvia and her closest human kin figure prominently in the following stanzas of her destiny. For 3 days after they took me, I hungered. Nowhere a teat to suck from, no piglet siblings to jostle and nudge. At last, in the full moon's sacred light, in the human room where I'd run in circles till my tapping trotters almost gave way. In this moment, Sylvia recounts the nubile chaos of her first days of life. The image on this next slide depicts a bearded human person wearing a straw hat and a black and white checkered shirt. Large leaf fronds frame him in the background. The language in After They Took Me and, quote, I hungered captures the organic impulse and the frustration of her early circumstances in anticipation of the cathartic moment she finally discovers how to nourish herself. The he-human, naked and white as my lost mother, bent on all fours over my untouched bowl, his beard a veil before me, and with musical loud sounds of guzzling showed me eating, gave me the joy of survival, end quote. The he-human appears as the first instance that a human enters the narrative, and he strips himself of his obstructive clothing to prostrate himself in order to better teach Sylvia how to eat. Sylvia identifies the he-human with that of her lost mother, signifying that his undressed state and white form produce such similarity to that of her pigkin that Sylvia determines she can finally take cues from this being. The he-human's prostration renders an imitation or resemblance of a pig, as if the he-human had to become pig in order to provide nurturance and care for Sylvia. Even the notion that Sylvia could not instinctively nourish herself proves it's especially insightful and considerate of Sylvia's flailing autonomy in her youth. This correlates to Brian Masumi's understanding that, quote, if the instinctive act were as it is reputed to be, a stereotyped sequence of pre-modeled actions executed by reflex in the matter of an automism, then instinct would be incapable of responding to chance changes in the environment. Sylvia responded to chance changes in her environment, proving that her faculties of comprehension and interaction are mutable, not fixed. Not only does the human kin show her, quote, eating, but he also gives her the joy of survival. The presence of joy here alludes to the ludic essence of surplus life reflected in Sylvia's mutability, her trans-individual impulse. The image on this next slide depicts a human person wearing a straw hat, presumably Coolidge, holding a large bird close to the heart. Leafless trees frame them in the background. The last stanza of the same poem illuminates the reader's understanding of how Sylvia perceives her human kin. Quick learner soon, I could hold my shit. I was rocked in warm human arms. I liked laps, the thighs of humans, cuddling. Every pig could be cuddled if there were justice. Every human could have its intelligent pig. Every pig its dexterous human. Our lives would be rich as creamy corn, tasty as acorns. Designating herself a quick learner, the absence of the space between the two distinct words reflects Sylvia's understanding of words she likely often hears in response to her good behavior in the Coolidge household. It reflects the same arbitrary nature of the use of the term pet earlier in the same poem. These terms are honorary titles bestowed upon Sylvia, who knows little of their meaning in her youth, and her acknowledgement of them in her poetic voice remains that of gratitude in being praised, loved, and appreciated. Sylvia then ruminates on the loveliness of being embraced, rocked, and cuddled by her human kin, the word cuddling occupying its own line and completing its own sentence, signaling to the reader that the act of cuddling represents a vital nurturing component. The image on this slide is the same one used in the first slide. It depicts a human person crouched down, petting a pig as a cat sits to the side. Flowers frame them all around. Levertov reveals in the next few lines that every pig could be cuddled and that, quote, every human could have its intelligent pig, every pig its dexterous human, end quote, if there were justice. Sylvia reveals a mutualism in the relationship between her and her human kin. Noting her intelligence and the dexterous human, she sees the capacity for each being to help the other. Sylvia identifies cuddling as an affective language by which both humankin and pigkin may communicate their affection. Cuddling is surplus life. In the same quote, Sylvia notes the urgent need for kinship between species. Encompassing a total of 17 poems, Pig Dreams truly advocates for kinship amongst humans and more than human beings. With limited time, this analysis explored only the initial poem of Levertov's collection, and I hope to pursue further study of the remaining poems and illustrations in support of ludic creatures of the world. Thank you for listening.